For 40 years, Colonel Samuel Carter believed discipline was the glue that held his family together. A Vietnam veteran, a man who stood ramrod straight even at 80, he built his life on order, loyalty, and legacy. His children were his medals, 5 bright stars on his chest. He bragged about them in barbershops, lifted their names in church, and believed that through them, his bloodline would march on long after his own boots stopped moving. But blood has a way of telling truths that flesh and words cannot. It began with a gift, a simple DNA testing kit one of his grandsons gave him for Father's Day. A fun idea, they said. Something to trace the Carter roots back to Africa, to find out what tribe, what land, what ancestors carried his name through centuries. Samuel smiled, thanked them, and swabbed his cheek, not knowing that the vial he sealed would detonate his entire world. Weeks later, when the results came back, the colonel sat in his recliner, Bible on the table beside him, glasses perched on his nose. He expected to see the proud Carter lineage stretched like a river behind him. Instead, he found silence. No matches. No trail. And when his children's results, which they had done separately for fun, arrived, a darker pattern emerged. One by one, his 3 children's names appeared on the screen. But beside each one was a truth that cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Not one of them carried his DNA. Not one. The man who taught them to ride bikes, who worked double shifts to put food on the table, who stood at graduations with tears in his eyes, who walked daughters down aisles, none of them bore his blood. They were his children in memory, in love, in sacrifice. But not in the way he had believed all his life. At first, Samuel thought it was a mistake. He contacted the company. He prayed. He waited. But science did not lie. The truth was unmovable like a headstone. And the mother of those children, his wife, Denise Carter, had carried the lie for decades. The colonel's hands shook as he read the results again. A lifetime of honor met with a lifetime of betrayal. And something inside him began to harden, like wet cement turning to stone. You see, betrayal is not just about the act. It is about the years stolen, the dreams built on sand, the legacy turned to ash. And Colonel Samuel Carter, disciplined, proud, unyielding, did not know how to live with betrayal. Viewers, imagine discovering that every laugh, every bedtime story, every dollar sacrificed to send a child to college was built on a lie. How would you react? Could you keep your faith? Could you forgive? Or would something darker take root? That's why I tell you, if you're watching this and you still haven't subscribed to True Crime Dossier, maybe you don't understand what betrayal feels like. Maybe you've never been blindsided. But if you have, if you know the sting of loving someone who deceives you, hit that subscribe button now. Because these stories, they're not just entertainment. They're warnings. And ignoring them could mean ignoring the very red flags that might one day save your life. But back to Samuel. He confronted Denise. At first she denied it, said the tests were flawed. But under the weight of his stare, under the quiet rage of a man who had commanded soldiers, her lips trembled. And then, she confessed. Not once. Not with one man. But 3 different times, 3 different men, 3 different fathers. The colonel didn't shout. He didn't throw a lamp across the room. He sat in silence, his jaw set, his eyes cold as his world collapsed in on itself. Neighbors would later recall that for weeks, Samuel walked his block in the evenings, his hands clasped behind his back, lips moving like a man in prayer. He said little to anyone. But those who looked into his eyes noticed something new there, a shadow, a storm. Because betrayal doesn't just wound. For some men it becomes a mission. And Samuel Carter was a man who had never abandoned a mission. And that is when the whispers of tragedy began. The colonel was no longer thinking like a father. He was thinking like a soldier, and soldiers, once betrayed, don't always put their weapons down. Samuel Carter had always been a man of presence. Even in his 80s, the colonel's voice carried the weight of command, deep, steady, impossible to ignore. Neighbors on the block in Birmingham used to say when Samuel called out your name, you straightened your back before you even thought about it. But lately, when he walked those cracked sidewalks at dusk, hands clasped behind him like he was still inspecting soldiers, his neighbors saw something different. His steps were slower, heavier. His eyes that once carried sermons of discipline and fatherhood, now burned with a quiet storm. Inside the Carter household, silence replaced the gospel music that used to float through the kitchen while Denise stirred collard greens. Their 3 children, all grown now, noticed the change in their father but chalked it up to age. They didn't yet know their very identities had been detonated. Samuel sat at the dining table one evening, the DNA papers spread like a battle map. Denise lingered near the sink, wringing her hands in the dish towel, avoiding his stare. "You let me live a lie, Denise," Samuel said finally. His voice didn't rise. "I didn't have to." His words cracked like gunfire in that quiet room. Denise's lips trembled. "Sam, you were gone so much. The army had you. I had nobody." He cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "Don't you dare put this on the flag. Don't you dare put this on the uniform." His jaw clenched, veins rising in his temple. "I came back from war every time, woman. I came back to you. And you greeted me with children that weren't mine." Tears welled in Denise's eyes. "But you raised them, Sam. You love them. Ain't that what makes a father? Blood don't raise children. A man does." Samuel leaned forward, his fists pressing into the table. "Don't preach fatherhood to me. I worked double shifts at the steel mill when the army check didn't stretch. I walked these kids to school. I taught them to pray. Every medal on my chest was for them. And you telling me none of that blood runs through their veins?" Viewers, let me pause right here. Imagine this, giving everything to your family for 50 years, only to discover the whole foundation was a lie. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, I gotta ask, do you even value the lessons hidden in these stories? Because let me tell you, betrayal doesn't knock politely. It barges in just like it did on Colonel Carter. Hit that subscribe button right now, unless you think lies like this could never touch your life. Back to the Carters. For days Samuel said little. He avoided family dinners. He skipped Sunday service. The first time in 40 years his voice didn't thunder amen from the back pew. The absence was noticed. Folks at Greater Mount Zion whispered, "What's wrong with Colonel Carter? He's sick." But no one dared ask directly. The storm was brewing in silence. Finally, Samuel called his eldest, Marcus, over to the house. Marcus was 45 now, a deacon at church, a man with Samuel's broad shoulders but none of his DNA. "Sit down, son," Samuel said, his voice flat. Marcus obeyed, sinking into the worn leather chair across from him. Samuel slid the DNA report across the table. "Read it." Marcus frowned, eyes scanning the paper. His lips parted as the words sunk in. He looked up, confusion mixing with denial. "Daddy, what is this supposed to mean?" "It means," Samuel said slowly, "I ain't your father. Not yours. Not your sister's." Denise lied. And now the truth is on paper. Marcus shoved the report back. "No, I don't care what some paper says. You're my father. You raised me, you loved me. That's all that matters." Samuel's jaw flexed. "Don't be a fool, boy. The blood don't lie." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the wood. "The blood don't lie? Neither does love, Daddy. You think I ever cared what a test said? You my father, period." But Samuel wasn't hearing it. Betrayal had taken root and it was growing wild. Viewers, let me put this in your lap. What would you do if you found out the children you raised, sacrificed for, cried for, were never yours by blood? Could you forgive? Or would it eat at you every time you looked them in the eye? Comment below, but if you ain't subscribing after hearing this, I'm questioning if you've ever truly been hurt before. That night, Marcus left the house in tears, slamming the door. Denise tried to comfort him, but Samuel sat rigid, staring straight ahead, his fists clenching tighter with every tick of the clock. Because betrayal, once planted, doesn't just sit quietly. It grows. It poisons. And for Colonel Samuel Carter, betrayal was beginning to feel like a mission. And missions in his life always had an end point. The whispers of tragedy were no longer whispers. They were footsteps. The Carter family hadn't gathered for a sit-down in months. But that Sunday afternoon, Denise called each child and told them their father wanted a family meeting. Her voice was clipped, uneasy, the kind of tone that made grown children rush to their parents' house without asking questions. Marcus arrived first, still shaken from his father's revelation. His sisters, Lorraine and Patrice, showed up minutes later, both carrying covered dishes. Because in a black household, no matter the storm, somebody still brought food. The house smelled of fried chicken and cornbread, but the air was thick with tension. Samuel sat at the head of the dining table, stiff as an oak, Bible closed in front of him like a silent witness. Denise hovered in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, eyes darting. Marcus broke the silence. "Daddy, please don't. Samuel ignored him. He cleared his throat, his voice low but cutting. I called y'all here because there's truth that needs telling. Truth that's been buried longer than y'all been alive. Lorraine frowned, glancing between her brother and mother. What's going on? Samuel slid the crumpled DNA papers across the table. That right there says none of y'all are mine. Not by blood. The words detonated. Patrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Lorraine shook her head violently. No, that ain't. Daddy, stop playing. Marcus buried his face in his hands. I tried to tell you, but he wouldn't listen. Patrice snatched the paper, her eyes scanning the cold percentages. 0%. 0. What is this? This ain't real. It's real, Samuel said. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white against the table. Your mama's been lying for decades. All eyes turned to Denise. She shrank under their stares, her lips trembling. Mama? Lorraine whispered, her voice breaking. Denise finally spoke, her tone sharp, almost defiant. I did what I had to do. Your daddy was gone. Overseas. Fighting wars that didn't keep me warm at night. I raised you the best I could. Best you could. Samuel thundered, his voice rattling the room. By lying? By letting me raise children that weren't mine? Children I bragged about in barbershops, children I bled for? That's your best. Viewers, stop and put yourself in their shoes. Imagine hearing your mother confess that everything you thought you knew about yourself was a lie. Would you even know who you are anymore? If you've never hit that subscribe button, now's the time, because stories like this don't just entertain, they warn. Ignore them, and you might ignore the very truth that could shatter your family one day. Back to the Carters. Lorraine stood up so quickly her chair tipped over. Tears streamed down her face. So what, Mama? You don't even know who my daddy is. Denise looked down, shame shadowing her face. Each of you got a different story. Marcus's voice cracked with anger. Different story? Or different man? Silence. Denise's tears fell now, but the damage was done. Patrice backed away from the table, shaking her head. So who am I then? Some man's daughter who don't even know I exist? Do I even got a right to call myself a Carter? Her words cut Samuel deeper than any battlefield wound. His name, the Carter name, was supposed to live on through them. Now it was tainted, a shadow of dishonor. Denise tried to reach for Patrice's hand, but she yanked it away. Don't touch me. You lied to all of us. To him. To everybody. Lorraine sobbed openly. I don't even know who I am anymore. Samuel's voice was low, deadly quiet. Exactly. Y'all don't even know who you are. He stood, towering over the table. This family is built on sand. Denise finally snapped. Don't act like you some saint, Sam. You left me alone year after year. What was I supposed to do? Lay in that bed cold and lonely while you played soldier? The colonel's stare froze her in place. I would have rather you left me than dishonor me. The room fell silent. The children wept. Denise trembled, and Samuel, rigid, cold, felt the last thread of his family unraveling. Viewers, I gotta tell you plain, if betrayal could tear apart a man like Colonel Carter, it can happen to anybody. Don't just watch and click away. Subscribe, because ignoring this story is ignoring the warning. And if you think you could endure this kind of truth without breaking, drop it in the comments. I don't believe you. As the meeting ended, Marcus tried to pull his sisters close, but Denise collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. Samuel turned his back on them all, staring out the window at the setting Alabama sun. Because in his mind, this wasn't just about lies anymore. This was about war. And Samuel Carter had never lost a war. The Alabama heat clung to the air like a second skin the morning Samuel Carter decided to confront the past. He woke before sunrise, polished his shoes until they shone, and tucked the revolver into his coat pocket. Not because he intended to use it that day, at least not yet, but because a soldier never marched into enemy territory unarmed. Denise watched him from the kitchen doorway as he buttoned his jacket. Where you going, Sam? He didn't look at her. Handling unfinished business. Her stomach dropped. She opened her mouth to protest, but the look on his face, stone, unreadable, silenced her. Samuel's first stop was the barbershop on Fifth Avenue, the same one he'd been going to for 40 years. The men there knew him, respected him, stood a little straighter when he walked through the door. But that day the atmosphere shifted. Colonel, Big Mike the barber greeted, forcing a smile. "You alright? Ain't seen you in a minute." Samuel didn't answer right away. His eyes swept the shop, landing on Harold Johnson, an old friend who used to visit the house when Denise was younger, always laughing a little too loud at her jokes. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Need a cut, Sam?" Mike asked. "No," Samuel said flatly, his voice carrying that old military weight. "Need answers." The barber shop fell quiet. Clippers stopped buzzing. Harold shifted in his chair, uncomfortable under the colonel's stare. "You were around my house a lot back then," Samuel said, stepping closer. "Always had a smile for Denise. Too much of a smile." "Colonel, come on, man," Harold said, his voice nervous. "That was decades ago. We was all just kids hanging around." Samuel leaned down until their faces were inches apart. "Answer me plain. Did you lay with my wife?" The shop froze. No one breathed. Harold swallowed hard. I don't know what she told you, but..." Samuel slammed his hand on the armrest, making Harold jump. "Don't play with me, boy. I done buried men for less than lies." Viewers, picture this. Your whole life you trusted your circle, your friends, your wife. And then one day you realize betrayal wasn't just in your home, it might have been sitting across the table at Sunday dinner. Let me stop here and say, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, maybe you ain't never been blindsided by the people closest to you. But if you have, then you know the only way to keep from being caught off guard is to stay alert, and subscribing keeps you 2 steps ahead. Don't gamble with trust. Back to the barbershop. Harold raised his hands. "Look, Sam, it was a mistake. A long time ago. You were gone, she was lonely. It didn't mean nothing. Samuel straightened slowly, his fists trembling at his sides. The room was dead silent, men shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. "Didn't mean nothing?" Samuel's voice cracked like a whip. "You sitting here telling me my whole life, my children, didn't mean nothing?" Harold stammered. "Colonel, please." Samuel turned abruptly and stormed out of the shop, the bell on the door jingling weakly behind him. That night, Samuel sat at the kitchen table, revolver laid bare in front of him like a companion. Denise stood in the doorway, her hands shaking. "Sam, please. This ain't the way." He didn't look up. "The way was 50 years ago, Denise. You chose another way. Now I gotta choose mine." Her voice cracked. "I was weak, Sam. But I never stopped loving you." Samuel's eyes lifted, sharp as a blade. "You don't do what you did to somebody you love." She broke then, sobbing into her hands, but Samuel didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the revolver, his mind racing with names, faces, decades of betrayal. Viewers, I'm telling you, this is how a man unravels. One secret, one betrayal, can undo 50 years of loyalty. If you think you could handle that truth without breaking, I dare you, write it in the comments. And if you can't even imagine it, subscribe right now, because ignoring stories like this is ignoring the very warning signs that might save your life. Samuel leaned back in his chair, the revolver glinting under the kitchen light. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself. "Tomorrow I settle this." Denise froze, tears streaming. "Sam, settle what?" But he didn't answer. His eyes were somewhere else, on the battlefield of his own home. The next morning, the colonel rose before dawn. He moved with the same precision he once had in the service. Boots polished, shirt pressed, revolver tucked discreetly in his jacket. To outsiders, it looked like any other day for Samuel Carter. But inside his mind, war drums were pounding. Denise stirred awake in the bedroom and heard him moving. "Sam? Where you going this early?" His voice floated back, calm but cold. "To finish what you started." She sat up, heart racing. "Please don't do this." But the front door slammed before she could reach him. Samuel's first stop was Raymond Cole's auto shop. Raymond had been a family friend for decades, a man Samuel trusted enough to fix his car, eat at his table, even babysit his children once or twice when Denise was overwhelmed. But now Samuel's mind replayed every laugh, every handshake, every too friendly glance. The garage door groaned open, the smell of motor oil and rubber filling the air. Raymond, wiping grease from his hands, looked up in surprise. "Well, I'll be," he said, forcing a smile. "Colonel Carter. Aren't seen you in a while. What brings you in?" Samuel stepped into the shop, his posture military straight. "You know why I'm here." Raymond blinked, nervous. "Come again?" Samuel's hand brushed the inside of his jacket. "Denise, my children. Don't make me repeat myself." The smile slipped from Raymond's face. He set the rag down slowly. "Sam, listen man, that was a lifetime ago. Things just happened. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." Samuel's jaw flexed, his voice rising. "Wasn't supposed to mean anything? You stood in my house, ate my wife's food, smiled at me like a brother, all the while knowing you laid with her. And now I find out one of my children carries your blood." Raymond raised his hands defensively. "Look, I never wanted to hurt you. Denise, she..." Samuel cut him off, his hand now firmly gripping the revolver beneath his jacket. His voice dropped to a growl. "Don't you speak her name to me." The tension was suffocating. Raymond's eyes flickered toward the street, hoping someone might pass by, hoping for a witness. But no one came. "Sam, please," he said, his voice shaking. "We were young. It was a mistake." Samuel leaned in close, his words a whisper but sharp as steel. "A mistake is leaving your boots untied. Betrayal is war." Raymond froze, his chest heaving. "You aren't gonna shoot me, Sam. You a man of God. A man of discipline." Samuel's eyes darkened. Even God had wrath. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock and the faint hum of a fan. Then, with trembling restraint, Samuel pulled his hand back from the gun. "You aren't worth the bullet. Not yet." He turned and walked out, leaving Raymond pale, sweating and shaken to the core. That night, Samuel returned home. Denise waited at the table, her Bible open, her face streaked with tears. "Sam, please," she begged. "You're gonna lose yourself. You're gonna lose everything." He stood over her, eyes cold. "I already lost everything. You're just too blind to see it." Viewers, let me put this in your lap. Imagine loving a woman for 50 years, only to realize she gave her body, and your legacy, to other men. Would you walk away quietly? Or would something inside you snap? If you aren't subscribed yet, you're playing games with your own peace of mind. Because when betrayal hits your house, you're gonna wish you listened to these warnings. Subscribe now, or sit in the comments and explain why you'd rather ignore the truth. Back to Samuel. Over the next few days, he visited 2 more men, a neighbor from years past and an old co-worker from the steel mill. Each encounter ended the same. Samuel demanding the truth, the men stammering excuses, the colonel's hand brushing that revolver but never firing. But each time the restraint grew thinner. Denise noticed. His eyes no longer softened when he looked at her. His silence was heavier, more dangerous. And at night, when he polished the revolver under the kitchen light, she realized this wasn't just about words anymore. It was only a matter of time. Because Samuel Carter had never been a man to bluff. And when a soldier declares war, someone always falls. The Carter children had always known their father as a pillar, unshakable, unmovable, steady as stone. But now, when Marcus, Lorraine, and Patrice came around, what they saw unsettled them. The colonel had changed. He moved differently, slower but sharper, like a coiled spring ready to snap. His voice, once warm in its authority, had turned cold. He no longer asked about their jobs, their kids, their lives. He only asked questions that cut like knives. "Who you really belong to?" he asked Lorraine one afternoon, his eyes burning. "Whose blood runs through you?" Lorraine's lips trembled. "Daddy, please don't. Don't call me that," Samuel snapped. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. "Don't lie to me like she did." Patrice burst into tears, rushing to her sister's side. Marcus stood frozen, torn between protecting his siblings and respecting the man who had raised him. "Daddy, we aren't lied to you," Marcus said softly. "We didn't ask for any of this." Samuel turned to him slowly, his face expressionless. "No, you didn't. But you're the proof of it." The room fell silent. Denise, standing in the kitchen doorway, gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Outside the Carter home, whispers spread faster than summer heat. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones. "Colonel don't look right these days. Heard he been confronting folks asking about Denise. Man's unraveling. That kind of anger? Aren't no good ending." At church, Pastor Green pulled Marcus aside after service. "Son, your daddy needs help. That man's carrying a storm inside him. And storms don't stay quiet forever." Marcus nodded, but his heart sank. Because he knew the pastor was right, And he knew Samuel Carter had never asked for help in his life. Back at home, Denise tried again to break through. She found Samuel sitting on the porch late one night, revolver resting in his lap like a loyal dog. "Sam," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, put it away. This aren't who you are." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark street. "This is exactly who I am," he said flatly. "A soldier. Soldiers finish missions." Denise's tears spilled over. "But these aren't enemies, Sam. These are your children. This is me. Your wife." Finally, his eyes cut toward her, sharp and cold. "You stopped being my wife the day you let another man lay in my bed." Her knees buckled. She covered her face, sobbing. Samuel didn't move. He sat silent, revolver heavy in his hand, as cicadas screamed into the night. Viewers, let me stop here. You see what betrayal does? It doesn't just wound, it rots. It turns fathers against daughters, husbands against wives. If you're watching this and you still haven't subscribed, ask yourself, what's stopping you? Pride? Denial? Let me tell you, denial won't save you when betrayal comes knocking. Hit that subscribe button now, or explain in the comments why you'd rather ignore the truth until it's too late. The breaking point came days later. The Carter children gathered again, this time without Denise's coaxing. They needed to see for themselves how far their father had slipped. "Daddy," Marcus began carefully, "we love you. We just want to help." Samuel sat rigid at the head of the table, revolver beside him like an honored guest. "Help?" he scoffed. "Aren't no help for betrayal. Y'all sit here with Carter written on your driver's licenses, Carter on your diplomas, Carter on your graves one day. And yet, not one drop of Carter blood in your veins." Patrice sobbed openly. Lorraine reached across the table, her hands trembling. "Daddy, please don't do this to us. You raised us. That makes you our father." For a flicker of a moment, Samuel's eyes softened. But then the storm returned. "Don't twist my sacrifice into your comfort," he said coldly. "I raise soldiers. Soldiers don't live in lies." Marcus clenched his fists, his own voice breaking. "Then what are we supposed to do? Just stop loving you? Just walk away?" Samuel leaned forward, his voice a whisper but sharp as glass. "You don't get to love me. Not after this." The room froze. And in that moment, the Carter children realized their father wasn't just broken. He was gone. The Carter family reunion had always been sacred. Once a year, cousins, aunties, uncles, and church friends crowded into Denise's backyard under the Alabama sun. There'd be ribs smoking on the pit, sweet tea sweating in pitchers, and children running barefoot through the grass. For decades, it was a celebration of family, of unity. But this year was different. When the cousins arrived, they noticed the tension immediately. Samuel sat apart from the crowd beneath the old oak tree, Bible on his lap, revolver tucked at his side under his jacket. He didn't laugh. He didn't greet. He just watched. Denise moved through the guests with forced smiles, her hands shaking as she passed out plates. She whispered apologies to her sister, who asked quietly, "Is Sam all right?" Denise forced a smile. "He's fine." But her eyes said otherwise. The Carter children tried to carry on. Marcus manned the grill. Patrice kept the little cousins busy with games. Lorraine organized the food table. But all three of them kept glancing toward their father, worry gnawing at their stomachs. Finally, midway through the gathering, Samuel stood. His tall frame commanded silence before he even spoke. Conversations died. Children froze. He cleared his throat, his voice booming with the authority of a man who had once commanded soldiers. "Family," he said, scanning the crowd. "I need y'all to hear me." Guests exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever seen the colonel take the floor like this. "For 50 years, Samuel continued, "I carried the Carter name with pride. I wore it like a uniform. I raised children under it. I bled for it." His hand shook as he pointed toward Marcus, Lorraine, and Patrice. "But these children? They don't carry my blood. Not one drop." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Plates clattered to the ground. Denise's sister grabbed her arm, whispering, "Lord Jesus?" Denise tried to step forward, tears streaming. "Sam, stop. Please." He turned on her, eyes blazing. "Don't you speak. You the reason this family been living a lie." The yard fell silent. Cousins covered their mouths. The children were ushered inside. Samuel reached into his jacket. The sight of the revolver glinting in the sunlight sent screams through the crowd. Chairs toppled as people scrambled back. Marcus stepped forward, hands raised. "Daddy, no. Put it down." But Samuel's grip tightened. His voice cracked, louder than it had ever been. 50 years y'all let me live in dishonor. 50 years of being laughed at behind my back while another man's blood ran through my house. And now you want me to sit quiet? Daddy, nobody laughing at you, Lorraine sobbed. We love you. Samuel's eyes flickered. For a moment his grip loosened. But then Denise spoke. Sam, if you kill somebody today you'll lose everything you got left. His jaw clenched. I already lost everything. Viewers, let me pause right here. Imagine being at a family cookout, the smell of ribs in the air, kids laughing one moment, and the next your father, your uncle, the man you looked up to, is standing with a gun in his hand, ready to tear the whole family apart. If you're watching this and you still haven't subscribed, I need you to ask yourself why. Why gamble with ignoring stories that show just how quickly life can change? Hit that button now, or drop in the comments and admit you're scared to face the truth. Back to the yard. Samuel raised the revolver. Screams echoed. Patrice collapsed to her knees, crying, Please, Daddy, please. For one long, terrible moment, time froze. All eyes were on the colonel, the proud, unshakable man they had all admired, now trembling, broken, dangerous. Finally, Marcus stepped forward, tears running down his face. He placed a hand gently on his father's arm. You taught me to be strong, Daddy. You taught me to be a man of honor. Don't let it end like this. Don't let the lie win. Samuel's lip quivered. His hand shook. The revolver lowered just an inch. But his eyes remained wild, his chest heaving. And in that moment, everyone knew this wasn't over. The storm hadn't passed. It was only waiting. The reunion ended in chaos. Guests scattered, whispers flooding the neighborhood like wildfire. Some said the colonel had lost his mind. Others whispered he'd been cursed. By nightfall, the entire block knew Samuel Carter had stood in his backyard with a gun, calling his children bastards in front of God and everybody. The Carter name, once a badge of honor in Birmingham, now carried shame. Samuel sat alone in the darkened living room after everyone left, revolver resting on the coffee table. The only light came from the flickering lamppost outside, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. Denise sat across from him, her Bible clutched tight in her lap. You humiliated me today, she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked at her, eyes hollow. You humiliated me for 50 years. Today was just truth. Denise's lips trembled. Sam, you don't gotta do this. You can still. I am not the one who needs forgiving, he cut in, his voice sharp as broken glass. You are. The next day, Samuel didn't go for his evening walk. He didn't polish his medals. Instead, he sat with the revolver, loading and unloading bullets like a ritual. Each click echoed through the house like a clock counting down. His children stopped by, begging him to put the gun away. Daddy, please, Lorraine said through tears. You scaring us. Samuel looked at her, his expression unreadable. Fear will keep you alive. Don't forget that. Marcus tried reason. Daddy, you raised us better than this. You said honor was everything. What honor is there in killing? Samuel leaned forward, his eyes blazing. There's no honor in living a lie, but there is honor in justice. That night, Denise made one last attempt to reach him. She stood in the doorway of the living room as he sat cleaning the revolver, his hand steady as a surgeon's. Sam, she whispered, tears streaking her face, I was wrong. I sinned. But don't let my mistakes drag you into hell. Samuel looked up slowly, his face a mask of stone. Woman, you already dragged me there. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. But her tears no longer touched him. Viewers, let me pause. You see what betrayal does? It doesn't just wound the betrayed, it poisons the betrayer too. If you think for 1 second that your family is immune, you're lying to yourself. Betrayal don't knock politely, it blows your door off the hinges. That's why you need to subscribe. Because ignoring these stories is like ignoring the storm clouds until the tornado's already tearing through your house. Back to Samuel. On the third night after the reunion, Samuel made his decision. He rose from his chair, slipped the revolver into his jacket, and walked out the door without a word. Denise jolted awake as the door slammed. She knew in her bones, this was the night. She called Marcus, her voice frantic. He's gone. Lord help me, Marcus, your daddy's gone? Marcus's heart sank. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, praying he wasn't already too late. Samuel's car crept through the quiet streets until it stopped in front of Raymond Cole's house. The same man Samuel had confronted days earlier. The lights inside glowed warm, family laughter spilling faintly into the night. Samuel sat in the car, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles whitened. His chest rose and fell like a man preparing for battle. Finally, he stepped out, revolver heavy in his pocket, and walked slowly toward the porch. Inside, Raymond was at the dinner table with his wife and grandson. He froze when he heard the knock at the door. Something in that sound, heavy, deliberate, made his stomach twist. "Who is it?" his wife called. Raymond's voice shook. I think it's Sam." The name alone drained the color from her face. She whispered, "Don't answer." But it was too late. Samuel Carter stood on the other side, a soldier once more, and this time he wasn't walking away. The knock on Raymond Cole's door was steady, deliberate, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission. It demanded it. Raymond's wife, Clara, clutched his arm. "Don't open it." But Raymond already knew. If he didn't answer, Samuel would find another way in. He always finished what he started. He opened the door. There stood Colonel Samuel Carter, tall and rigid in the glow of the porch light, his eyes dark hollows, his jacket heavy with the revolver inside. "Sam," Raymond's voice shook. "It's late. Let's talk tomorrow." "There is no tomorrow for betrayal," Samuel said flatly. His hand slipped into his jacket. Clara gasped, pulling her grandson behind her. "Jesus, no." Samuel stepped inside, the revolver gleaming as he drew it out. 50 years, Raymond. 50 years I called you brother. Ate at your table. Trusted you. And all the while you were stealing from me. Raymond's hands shot up. "Sam, it was a mistake. It was decades ago." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," Samuel snapped, his voice rising like thunder. "You made me raise another man's son." The room was still, every breath shallow. Raymond took a cautious step back, his voice breaking. "Please, Sam. Don't do this in front of my family." Samuel's grip tightened. "You weren't thinking about family when you laid with mine." The shot rang out like a cannon. Raymond staggered, clutching his chest, eyes wide with shock as blood bloomed across his shirt. He collapsed to the floor, Clara's scream piercing the air. Samuel's chest heaved, his hand trembling. But his eyes were locked on Denise's betrayal, embodied in Raymond's lifeless body at his feet. Clara knelt over her husband, sobbing uncontrollably. "Lord Jesus, why?" Samuel's gaze cut toward her, his face unreadable. "Because honor matters." She looked up at him with fire in her eyes. "Honor? You just murdered a man who called you brother." Samuel's jaw clenched. "He stopped being my brother the day he put his seed in my house." But Samuel wasn't done. Because standing frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling, was Denise. She had followed him. "Sam," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't." His arm shot up, revolver trained on her. The room froze. "You," he said, his voice low, shaking with rage. "You did this." Denise raised her hands, sobbing. I know I sinned. But Sam, I loved you. Through it all, I loved you." "Love?" His laugh was hollow, bitter. "You don't do this to a man you love." "Please," she cried, her knees buckling. "Don't do this in front of our kids. Don't let them lose both of us." Samuel's hand shook, his eyes wet now, torn between fury and grief. For a moment, the revolver wavered. But then the storm inside him broke. The second shot cracked the air. Denise's body jerked, then crumpled beside Raymond's, blood pooling into the rug. Clara screamed again, clutching her grandson tighter, shielding his eyes. Samuel stood motionless, the revolver dangling at his side, his chest heaving. Two bodies lay before him. One his wife of 50 years, the other his oldest friend. For the first time in his life, the colonel looked small. Dear viewers, this is the cost of betrayal. It doesn't just end marriages, it ends lives. You watching this, thinking it's just another story, but what happens when the truth in your house explodes like this? Don't gamble with denial. Subscribe now, or drop in the comments why you'd rather pretend betrayal couldn't touch you. But know this, it can. After a long silence, Samuel finally tucked the revolver back into his jacket. He turned and walked out into the Alabama night, his shoes echoing against the porch steps. The neighbors, drawn by the screams and gunfire, peeked from their porches. Gasps rippled as they saw him emerge, calm, blood on his hands, his jacket heavy with the gun. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply walked to his car, slid behind the wheel and drove off into the night, headlights carving a path through the darkness. Because in his mind, the mission was complete. But for the Carter children, for the community, for everyone left behind, the war had only just begun. The rain was coming down hard by the time Samuel Carter pulled up to Marcus's house. Headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating his son's front porch. Samuel sat for a long moment behind the wheel, the revolver heavy in his lap, his mind strangely calm. He stepped out into the rain, walked to the porch and knocked firmly. Marcus opened the door, eyes wide with shock. His father stood there soaked to the bone, his coat stained dark with blood. "Daddy. Lord have mercy, what happened?" Samuel's voice was low, steady, like a man who'd made peace with his fate. "Call the police, son. Tell him where I am." Marcus's throat tightened. "Daddy, no. Please tell me you didn't." "I did what needed to be done," Samuel interrupted. His eyes glistened in the porch light, but no tears fell. "Now do as I say." Marcus's knees buckled. He stumbled back into the house, fumbling for the phone with trembling hands. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet Birmingham street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and porch railings, whispering in disbelief. "Is that Colonel Carter? Lord Jesus, what done happened?" The man they once admired as a pillar of strength now stood on his son's porch, hands raised as officers swarmed him. "Mr. Carter, drop the weapon," one shouted. Samuel calmly set the revolver on the porch rail, stepped back and allowed the cuffs to click around his wrists. He didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't even flinch. As they led him to the squad car, Marcus called out, his voice breaking. "Daddy, why? Why'd you do this?" Samuel turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "You'll understand one day." The news spread like wildfire. Decorated veteran arrested for double homicide. The whole city buzzed with the unthinkable. Church elders shook their heads in disbelief. "Not the colonel. No, not him." Deacon Brooks murmured, "Betrayal will drive a man to madness." At Greater Mount Zion that Sunday, pews overflowed. Folks wept openly during prayer, the Carter family's name heavy on every tongue. The choir sang, but the music couldn't wash away the weight of what had happened. Meanwhile, Marcus, Lorraine, and Patrice sat together in the living room, their faces pale with grief. Marcus held his head in his hands. "Mama's gone. Daddy's locked up. We don't even know who we are no more." Patrice rocked back and forth, whispering, "He shot her. He really shot her." Lorraine wiped her tears with trembling hands. "He said he loved us, but he couldn't see past the blood. We weren't enough for him." The silence that followed was suffocating. Their entire foundation had crumbled in a matter of days. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "We gotta hold each other up now. 'Cause if we don't, this family's gone forever." But even as he said it, doubt weighed heavy. Dear viewers, let me stop here. Look at this family, ripped apart by secrets, betrayal, and blood. Some of y'all think you could survive this kind of truth, but let me tell you, very few can. If you're watching and you still haven't subscribed, maybe you're afraid to face how fragile family really is. Maybe you'd rather pretend your house can't crack like this one did. But if you know betrayal could shatter anyone's life, hit that subscribe button now. And if you're too scared to, at least drop a comment explaining why. Don't stay silent. That night, the Carter children walked into the police station to see their father one last time before the trial began. Through the glass, they saw him, handcuffed, head bowed, his once straight back now curved beneath the weight of what he'd done. Lorraine pressed her hand against the glass, tears streaming. "Daddy, why?" Samuel lifted his head slowly. His eyes were tired, hollow. "Because lies kill too. Just slower." The words pierced them deeper than any bullet. The trial of Colonel Samuel Carter drew the whole city into the courthouse. News vans lined the street, cameras flashing as the once proud veteran was escorted inside in shackles. For decades, people called him a hero. Now they called him a killer. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers until the judge entered. Samuel stood tall at the defense table, his face blank, his eyes locked forward as if on parade rest. The prosecution painted him as a man consumed by rage, a husband who let betrayal twist him into a murderer. They recounted every detail in chilling sequence. The confrontation, the gunshots, the screams. Photos of Denise and Raymond's bodies drew gasps from the jury. The defense offered little resistance. His lawyer argued Samuel was a broken man, betrayed beyond reason. But Samuel himself refused to testify. When asked if he had anything to say, he shook his head slowly. "I said all I had to say the night it happened." His children sat together in the gallery, their faces etched with grief. Patrice wept openly. Lorraine stared at the floor, unable to meet her father's eyes. Marcus, jaw clenched, held his sisters close, but inside he was unraveling too. They weren't just mourning their mother. They were mourning the father who'd raised them, and the man he had become. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell silent. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. On the charge of second-degree murder, guilty. The words cut like a knife. Samuel didn't flinch. His face remained stone. The judge's voice rang heavy, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For a moment the room was still. Then sobs broke out. Patrice buried her face in Marcus's chest. Lorraine whispered, "It's over. It's really over." Samuel simply nodded as if the sentence was no surprise. As deputies led him away, he turned once toward his children. His lips moved, forming words without sound. Some said he mouthed, "I'm sorry." Others swore it was, "Remember me." The community was left reeling. Greater Mount Zion held a service in honor of Denise, the woman many had admired for her warmth and resilience. Pastor Green preached about secrets, how they rot families from the inside out. "Sin will always find its way into the light," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "And when it does, it doesn't just break the sinner, it breaks everyone around them." The Carter children sat in the front pew, hands clasped, faces streaked with tears. For them, the sermon wasn't theory. It was lived truth. In prison, Samuel became a ghost. Fellow inmates respected him for his military bearing, but he spoke little. He spent most of his days in the chapel, Bible in hand, though no one knew if he read it for comfort or condemnation. One guard swore he heard Samuel muttering late at night, "Betrayal don't end. It just passes on." Viewers, this is where I need you to look in the mirror. Because Samuel Carter's story isn't just about him. It's about every family built on lies, every marriage hiding secrets, every child who doesn't know the full truth about where they come from. If you're watching this and you still haven't subscribed, I have to ask, why? Why ignore the warnings staring you in the face? Subscribing could be the difference between seeing the red flags in your own life, or being blindsided like the Carters. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Could you survive learning the people you love most aren't who you thought they were? Or would you break just like the Colonel? In the end, the Carter family was left in ruins. Denise dead. Raymond dead. Samuel locked behind bars until his last breath. Marcus, Lorraine, and Patrice carried the scars, forever caught between love and betrayal, family and truth. The Carter name, once spoken with pride in Birmingham, became a whisper, a cautionary tale, a reminder that secrets don't stay buried. Because betrayal doesn't just kill trust. Sometimes, it kills people. Colonel Samuel Carter spent a lifetime serving his country, raising a family, and carrying himself with honor. But one secret, one betrayal buried for decades, unraveled it all. A husband, a father, a soldier, turned into a killer. And in the end, nobody won. His wife, gone. His friend, gone. His children, broken. His name, destroyed. Betrayal didn't just take his peace, it took his soul. Dear viewers, ask yourself this. What would you do if your whole family turned out to be a lie? Could you forgive? Or would you fall just like the Colonel? Don't just watch and walk away. If you don't subscribe, maybe you haven't never felt real betrayal. Or maybe, you're just too scared to admit it could happen to you. Subscribe now before the next story finds you unprepared. Because betrayal don't knock politely, it kicks the door in. Subscribe now. And if you won't, at least drop a comment explaining why. Otherwise, you're just waiting for your own house to fall.